welcome back to this week's episode of Underwater, presented by The Pond. This week, I am pleased to be joined by my friend Adam, who I believe becomes the first person to appear on both Underwater and in GoodWill Yunting. If you are not familiar with Adam Sternbach, he is a super talented lawyer and the general counsel for Tessera, which is one of the more interesting NFT product teams out there. I believe they just launched their editions marketplace called Escher, which totally flips the script and actually treats the artist as a first class citizen. Go figure. Who would have thought artists should actually be what you index on an art application? But we've been lucky enough to chat with Adam on GoodWill Yunting about kind of crypto politics and regulation, and absolutely thrilled to have Adam here this week with us on Underwater. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate the intro and glad to be the first crossover guest across all of YC's pods.
Awesome. Yeah. So how's it going with you? How have you been enjoying the week? I assume you've been keeping up with the goings on, as the kids say.
Yeah, I mean, it's fast and furious as always. I feel like we're in meme coin season. We'll see how long that lasts, but that's been occupying my Twitter feed, and then obviously a lot of the regulatory and continuing goings on there. So it's never dull, never slow.
That is true. It is never dull. I guess this week we finally saw the defeat of one Kamikaze ETH, who had been touting the Ethereum death spiral for the last several months. Believe it or not, people that spent years staking Ethereum to secure the network did not immediately all turbo dump it to zero. I'm in disbelief.
Yeah, it's always fun to see how those things end up playing out when you have people so strongly in various camps of what will happen. But yeah, I think obviously that was successful. Shanghai went well, and now I need to figure out what the next one is. It's something about like L2s from what I gather, but I haven't looked at it much.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'm super bullish on L2s. I mean, it's just a great Ethereum narrative as well. Like the L2s settle on Ethereum, so it like drives demand to the kind of settlement layer. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Meme coin season is back. You have Pepe. I did not buy any Pepe, so I'm obviously sad.
Yeah, I have faded generational wealth as well to this point. But uh,
Yeah,
it's always hard for me to know like what has legs and what doesn't,
oh,
and I
a
generally
hundred
prefer to
percent.
just you know sit it
It
out.
is nice to know that we've probably both faded enough generational wealth at this point to just buy the presidency outright for either of us.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I definitely think that's probably right. But I don't know. I always find these coins like the meta narratives around them quite interesting. Like you just throw a dollar sign in front of something called Pepe, and boom, you have a narrative.
Oh, 100%. But that's how things trade. I mean, in a hyper financialized, low friction world, um, like I don't know if anybody under the age of 30 is, subscribing to Barron's and checking out the P&E ratios of you know, some very boring mining company anymore. It's just kind of like what's
Oh,
mimetic. I'll toss some
without a
I'll
doubt.
toss some coins into that.
Yeah, I mean, crypto is culture, if nothing else. And I think you are absolutely right that there is like a pretty stark divide generationally by like only a handful of years. I really don't think it's like more than 3 to 5 years on one side or the other. And I think it's just like how people grew up around what role the internet served for them. But yeah, I don't think that like generally, and I'm generalizing a bit here, but like people over the age of like 40 really understand like just what internet culture is and like meme coins and Doge, obviously, and Shiba and like everything that kind of has come with with those things. Like, I understand why they don't think it has value, but like, I very much have come to understand now, being in this space full time for a year and a half plus, and like obviously spending a lot of time in it before that, just personally. But now I get the double whammy of personal and professional. Um, it's like we talk a lot when we've had other conversations about like the tech and understanding crypto being kind of like a learning curve, but just the cultural side of crypto is also a pretty massive learning curve that I don't think people appreciate.
Oh yeah, I mean just the cultural side of the internet as well, the way we talk, the
Yes.
abbreviations. I do you find yourself speaking internet to your non overly on the internet friends and them being like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, I definitely use more trading terms, I guess, in some respects. So, like, when we're talking about like an athlete's career with my friends, like, I will be more likely to use like the Pico top of his career in ways that I never would have done before. But I feel like it just captures more accurately for me, like what I am trying to get across. But they're like, what the fuck is the Pico top of an athlete's career?
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess in other news, our beloved Goldman Gary started to receive his paddling yesterday. I don't know if you managed to catch much of the hearings. I definitely want to pick your brain on sort of, does this signify anything for? I mean, look, it's very fun to laugh at Gary, and he very much debased and embarrassed himself in in Washington yesterday. I guess he's usually in Washington, but yeah, I guess like one, did you catch any of the hearings, and two, does this signal anything for us other than he's kind of a cheap political punching bag for some congressional Republicans right now?
I generally don't watch these hearings. Just the amount of time they take to get the relevant clips or summaries, I find I usually end up relying on Twitter and different groups I'm in and things like that to kind of suss out what matters and what doesn't. And then if there's a particular part that I actually want to watch a rundown, I can go find that certain like questioner or something like that. Um, so I don't do it for like the popcorn and show of it, and I think it's as much entertainment as substantive, for like everyone, whether you are in crypto or whether you are on Capitol Hill. Like, you're not necessarily breaking much news that I don't think we already knew in these types of hearings. I think from a strictly like political and oversight perspective, they have a role, but when something is as charged as kind of the division with a regulator or with a cabinet official or something like that on Capitol Hill, like, these are opportunities to have some sound bites and make a statement and develop a bit of a following, which I think a lot of people yesterday were successful at doing. But to your point of whether this actually moves the needle or changes much, I don't really think so.
I guess that's a bit of a bummer. The thread that I thought was particularly interesting, and I can't recall the actual person who was questioning him. It wasn't Emmer, and it wasn't that guy from Ohio that's introduced a bill to remove him, which I found hilarious. But it was the guy who was really hitting on this, like, is Ethereum a commodity? And there were two things interesting in this. One, he's bringing up sort of the regulatory, seemingly, I guess, like the disagreement between the CFTC and the SEC as it relates to Ether and whether or not it's a commodity or a security. But he also kept pulling on this string of, look, you've refused, like, why can't you just say whether this is a security or a commodity? And Gensler kept saying, well, I don't want to speak on any one token, yet he has spoken quite clearly on Bitcoin being a commodity. So it's like, why not this? And I think that was kind of one of the more, it was less flashy than some of the other, as you said, like highlights to sort of secure a political following. But I think it sort of got to not the total crux, but one of the important facets of sort of what's going on right now in this tug of war between the CFTC and the SEC.
So I think the person you are referring to is Patrick McHenry, who is the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. I believe he's from North Carolina. And it was one of the first clips because he went first, I believe, or went towards the top in terms of questioning. But if we're thinking about the same thing, which I believe we
Yeah, I
are,
think so.
um, yeah, I mean, I think, the question obviously in the regulatory implications of whether something is a security or commodity drive kind of the market structure and regulation of that particular instrument. And you normally have the CFTC, who regulates not necessarily like spot commodity transactions, but regulates derivative swaps, futures contracts. And so that kind of introduces a whole set of regulatory obligations. If you're trading in future swap derivative products, if you're just trading spot commodities, so like you're just buying and selling on a crypto exchange, even if that was regulated by the CFTC under its current structure, that really wouldn't be something that they regulate, because they generally, I mean, they do not regulate spot commodity markets. Granted, if there were to be crypto exchange regulation, that would be carved out and done differently, and there would be regulation over spot transactions. But I think the more kind of interesting element is if the chair, on the record in front of Congress under oath, says that he believes Ether is a security. And he said it in other venues, but never in a venue necessarily like that comes with kind of more legal potential implications, both for like him as the chair, but also for the industry, having said it under oath. Although I think he's kind of, to your point, made his position pretty clear one way or the other, but I understand why he didn't do it in that venue. It introduces kind of an unequivocal set of obligations of where these things can trade, how these things have to trade. That I think by implication, the crypto market kind of generally accepts as his belief, but I do think the form and venue in which he was in is probably why he wouldn't make that statement. But again, that begins to introduce, and this was the point that McHenry made yesterday, some of the challenges around the regulatory ambiguity and the lack of regulatory clarity when you won't go on the record as to whether Ether is a security or commodity.
Yeah, and I think him and potentially others in the committee kind of, again get to this point where it's like you say come in and register, no one can. Instead, you're just handing out lawsuits. You're issuing Wells notices. The Wells notices are something I'd love to get into as well. And it's just like who is served by this? Who is being protected? I think someone else also very rightfully pointed out that FTX, Luna, and Binance were all offshore entities or largely offshore entities, platforms or chains that many U.S. customers used. So this whole idea of, hey, we're protecting U.S. customers by driving these things outside of America is just, I mean, I would argue it shows a fundamental lack of understanding with how the internet actually works. But yeah, there was just like a lot of, I mean, I think while this might have been a dog and pony show, they are starting to get to some of these issues, which is, um, you say come in and register, but we can't. You say you're protecting US customers, but driving companies offshore where people can still use them because the internet exists doesn't work and isn't helpful for retail. And, you know, you're just sort of surprising people by suing them left, right, and center, issuing Wells notices, not telling people what the Wells notices are even for or about, or engaging with the companies who you hand them out to. Um, and so, yeah, I guess it's like, where do we go from here?
I think it's a good observation. And I think when I said it doesn't really change much, I mean in the sense that I don't think the SEC or the chair is now going to, go back in to its offices today, look around at each other and say, oh, we finally came to the conclusion that there isn't clarity here and that we need to do a rulemaking process and we need to engage in a much more productive way with the industry, and put out a proposed rulemaking or some type of additional guidance that will give the industry some clarity about how we determine whether certain assets are securities or not, and kind of update guidance that hasn't been updated for several years. Like, I don't expect that to happen, but I do think your point and like the incremental progress and distinction of elected officials, so the members of that committee who were questioning him yesterday, demonstrating that they have an understanding of crypto and some of the more nuanced areas of crypto, I think is very important and should not go overlooked. I think it demonstrates that there are advocates in Washington who care about this, who both care about it from a technological perspective, but also care about it from the need to hold regulators to account, especially when you have an industry that, while not huge, is definitely growing and there's definitely a lot being developed. And crypto has its challenges, no doubt, in proving some of those benefits. But I don't think you can really argue that keeping development talent and developer talent and engineering talent and building out those use cases in the US is in the national interest long term. So I think incrementally, we can't take yesterday's hearing and say, oh, nothing is changing, because while nothing may be changing today on the regulatory front, the fact that you have more members engaged and the fact that you have more just individual holders of crypto or people who are interested in crypto watching the hearing, tweeting about the hearing, hopefully kind of following up with their representatives or with the members of the House and this committee who were some of the more outspoken proponents of crypto, and now hopefully they will have opportunities to come on podcasts and have opportunities to make more appearances and just continue to engage with the crypto community. I think on the longer term arc of how we do ultimately see change, it's kind of those types of things building on each other to the fact that crypto becomes an important political issue. And instead of now maybe 25 or so members of the House who really care about this issue and understand it, you have 50, and then you have 100, and then you have 200. And I think there are efforts underway to try and get more engagement and try and demonstrate to people that constituents and voters care about this. And I think hopefully that can be one of the takeaways from this hearing, and the crypto community can kind of continue to make it known that they do care about these things.
Yeah, that's a great point. Something I continually get hung up on is why do this? What what is the angle? What is Gensler trying to get by playing it this way? Is it purely just trying to cover his ass over the FTX thing? If it is, I don't think it's an especially good strategy. Or is he trying? I mean, there's a lot of talk that, he's trying to secure himself the position at Treasury after Yellen leaves. But I guess I don't. Maybe I just lack sort of the understanding of kind of like the nuance of the politics of all of this. But I kind of just don't really comprehend why this is a strategy that, why is this the hill that the SEC seems to be dying on? Why won't they engage people? Right? Gensler points out in this hearing as well that he's a subject matter expert. He taught this stuff. Now, he's never used these things. So, I
Right.
think he's as much an expert on crypto as I am on scuba diving. Um, but I guess it's when, why dogmatically go down this road? Why not change? Why not engage the industry? What's the end game? What does he get? What's the goal?
I think the short answer is it's hard. Having to develop a new regulatory framework that recognizes and accounts for the way that digital assets and digital assets exchangers and issuers of digital assets are fundamentally different from traditional securities issuers like Fortune 500 corporations or startups that are moving into the Fortune 500 and going public via IPO or direct listing or something like that. They're just very different sets of rules, very different processes that need to be introduced. And I think there just isn't a desire to undertake that hard work. And I think as a former government official in the state of New Jersey, I think that part is very unfortunate, because I do think a core fundamental part of a regulator's job is working with industry to set up and not try and dictate where an industry goes. I mean, unless it's, truly criminal, fraudulent, like not in the public interest. And I know there's obviously a lot of people who think that about crypto, but I think we and most others recognize that while that element of the industry exists, it is certainly not kind of the direction and where this industry will end up. like anything else, there are bad actors. But I think fundamentally they are looking to just kind of dictate the direction of an industry. And I don't necessarily think that's the mandate of a regulator. It's much more to kind of set rules of the road and engage with industry and figure out what the challenges are so that they can play by those rules of the road. And there just hasn't been a willingness to kind of meet the industry there. And I think your point earlier about the fundamental impossibility of registering digital assets in the same way that you would register shares of stock when a company goes public. Paradigm, one of the larger crypto VCs and the VC that has backed Tessera, is publishing a very good series kind of outlining what these challenges are and bringing some of that to light and really digging into the details of both the companies that have tried to register, as well as like the fundamental differences when they ask about the management team of a securities issuer. Like there's no management team for various crypto protocols or tokens. It's just, it doesn't map. And I think the other frustrating thing is you are now seeing in other jurisdictions, whether it's Europe or Asia, regulatory structures that, while probably not perfect, are at least a start and at least could form a discussion. And a lot of time, the way policy and regulation gets done is you kind of look around at who else is doing what. And I don't think it's an excuse anymore to say, we don't want to do something because we have to start from scratch. Like they don't need to start from scratch. They need to study it and they need to understand it, but they do have blueprints to go off of at this point. But it just seems like there's a complete lack of interest in even getting there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to ask about Coinbase Wells notice. So my sort of pet theory on this has been it was actually bullish for crypto. And I say that from the following standpoint. In the months preceding the Wells notice, there was, I think in markets, uncertainty is very bad for stability and for the ability to form a base and a platform and grow. And there was this regulatory overhang that we had for months and months and months. And all of a sudden, Coinbase gets hit with their Wells notice. And my view on this was sort of, look, if the SEC is going to come after, like this is quite a bit different than going after library, right? Library is going to settle. Um, Going after the most well capitalized, probably they have the best lawyers in crypto, the most compliant, the biggest exchange, certainly in the US. Going after them, I think was a pretty big signal that hey, it actually doesn't matter what you're doing as a project to try to be compliant. If they want to come after you, they're going to come after you. Like there actually is no compliance. There's no level of risk that you can mitigate. If they want you, they're going to get you. And my view on that has been that actually does provide a lot of clarity and allows projects to just sort of make better decisions. So rather than spending days or weeks fretting over marginal decisions or going back and forth with lawyers over, okay, well, if I tweak this thing, then like, is it going to save us? It's one of these things where it's kind of like, well, actually, nothing's going to save you. So on some level, you just need to understand what the risks are, accept those risks, and act what's in, like, do what's in the best interest of your project, because you can't actually successfully mitigate risk. I'm curious if you think there's any truth to that theory, and you could say no, like I could be a very stupid theory, but I have felt like there is a lot more clarity after this Wells notice, kind of with a bit more of the SEC's cards on the table, so to speak.
So I'll take it in two parts, I guess. It was inevitable based on the statements the SEC was making and the actions they were bringing, primarily the Wahi case about the insider trading for the former product manager at Coinbase, who they alleged was trading in what are, again, their allegations, securities listed on Coinbase, and just generally the tenor and tone that the SEC was taking around all tokens being securities, Coinbase being an unregistered securities exchange. Like, I think it was inevitable that the SEC had to eventually come after Coinbase, because otherwise they get into certain issues that are kind of playing out in the Ripple case right now around fair notice. And, they approved Coinbase's ability to go public fully knowing what their business model was. It hasn't changed really. And so at some point, you believe that the government is going to tell you when you're doing something that you're not allowed to do. And if they don't do that, then you can, there's a legal theory, operate under the fact basically that they haven't told you you can't do something because, otherwise they'd bring a regulatory action. So I think just based on the way that all of this stuff was positioning and how kind of loud the SEC was about various aspects of the crypto industry, Coinbase had to be in the crosshairs. And I'm sure Coinbase was aware of that for quite some time. And it seems like from their public statements, they were aware, obviously, and are also prepared to fight this as long and as far as they need to. And I think ultimately, absent Congress stepping in, which doesn't seem terribly likely, with one caveat that I'll share, in the next couple years, I think this ultimately plays out in the courts, though the caveat is I actually think there's a better likelihood that we get some digital asset regulation and clarity through Congress now, as opposed to, hoping the SEC writes rules or changes its processes to account for digital assets, because it's now the largest US domestic crypto exchange in the crosshairs. And at some point, I think some elected officials somewhere where they have constituents, and they, Coinbase now has the story to tell of how they've tried to do everything the right way and still can't come into compliance, is probably going to care more because you have a large player who's beginning to make noise. So I agree with you from that standpoint. I think this will hopefully, in some way, shape, or form, give us the clarity we needed. To your other point about, projects and kind of how projects operate, that's certainly a little bit trickier. All of this is facts and circumstances based, so I think different people will try and account for things differently. But I do think it's clear that the SEC feels one way, and that the industry, despite what the SEC thinks, tries to do what it can to best structure things in ways that work and that are compliant. But those are just going to kind of continue to be headbutts and battles that have to play out.
Yeah, I guess like my thinking was more like I think there's a pretty big chasm between obvious non-compliance and compliance, whatever that is, hypothetically. And I know at least, for myself, for projects that I both work on, projects that I've invested in and speak with the founders on, there was a lot of calories burned, and a lot of dollars spent on lawyers just debating these very marginal decisions, because it's like how do we sort of stay in the middle of the pack? Um, and it's not that your decisions don't matter 100%, and I think every project will still sort of take on the risk that they feel comfortable with. I guess it's more that Coinbase being served a Wells notice and being treated hostilely after the notice by the SEC at least implies to me that there is no safe haven. There is no amount of, like good that I can do or rules that I can follow that moves my risk close enough to zero. And so if there is nothing that I can do to be compliant, there are certainly things that I could do to be obviously out of compliance, or create obvious big risk. But a lot of these marginal decisions, I think, based on this action, these marginal decisions now don't actually, you don't get enough juice from the squeeze on those anymore, at least in my view.
I think that's fair. I think certain things that you do will be used against you or used to demonstrate that you are not complying. If you do have a policy, it demonstrates that you know that you may need a policy. And if you don't have a policy, it demonstrates that you were not as kind of diligent as you should have been in adopting it. Like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I do think that has shown itself in various complaints that the SEC has filed for regulatory enforcement actions. So I completely agree with you there. I think there's obviously better ways to do things than not. But yeah, I think you can be a good actor and you can still come within the crosshairs. And I do think it's a very legitimate gripe of the industry that if there aren't going to be rules that provide clarity, then the focus should be primarily on the frauds, the bad actors, and things like that. And I do think when you begin to see the tide of actions turn towards the good actors, it obviously raises a lot of what you've mentioned. I think, the elephant in the room that can't be ignored, obviously, is FTX and a lot of the political pressure and just general kind of media fallout that has come by painting crypto as FTX and all of it under kind of the umbrella of the allegedly fraudulent activity that was occurring at FTX. And I think that's just an unfortunate consequence that we see right now. And it's kind of regulating the bottom, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. I had something clever to say, but then I forgot it. So I'll wrap up on this one. Taylor Swift concert tickets, security or not a security?
Yeah, I think you begin to get into some tricky areas. People obviously buy Taylor Swift concert tickets for some different reasons. And if you just kind of apply some of the comments and language that have been used to describe digital assets to Taylor Swift concert tickets or trading cards or a variety of other things, um, it goes down a direction in the hole that I don't necessarily think was ever intended. Uh, so no, I don't think Taylor Swift concert tickets are securities, but
It could
I
be.
think there could be I think there could be pretty decent arguments made that just applying kind of the letter of the guidance and commentary that has been provided, it fits within that box. And that's kind of where you have a lot of these unintended consequences and kind of this overreach that I think begins to kind of result in some pretty ridiculous examples.
Yeah, I did beg my wife to sell her Taylor Swift tickets, but she also has passed up an opportunity at generational wealth for our family, as she intends to go.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about the utility,
Yeah,
right? They're just NFTs at the end of the day.
that's true. Well, Adam, we're sort of pushing past the half-hour mark. Want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for coming on. I am going to leave a link to those paradigm posts that you mentioned in the show notes. So, folks who are interested in catching up on that, I would recommend checking that out. It's definitely some of the best writing on the sort of legal and regulatory side that I've come across in the space. Um, Adam, where can folks find you on the interwebs?
Primarily Twitter is probably the best place. Just my first name, last name, Adam Sternbach, is my handle. I tweet some crypto policy, crypto politics, some NFT takes every now and again. But that's probably the best.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for joining us. I am OXBU. You can find me on Twitter at 0xBEW. Join us again next week. And if you love the pod, subscribe. If you think the pod sucks, let me know, and I'll, as I keep promising, I'll do my best to make it suck less. All right, everybody. Until next week. Bye bye.
All right. Thanks a lot.